Yo and hello everybody, Mike here, baseball collector. Welcome to the second episode of Bench Clear University and Bench Clear U. What we're trying to do here is give some educational topics around all things about sports cards. And there's so many new collectors out in the hobby. There's so many people that are getting involved, and that is great. And there are a lot of things that people need to think about when they get into this hobby. The first episode I did last week was on the topic nobody wants to talk about, which is, man, what if I die? Excuse me. What happens when I die? If I die before I've been able to liquidate my collection and help out my family. And so I gave some tips on that and how to think about that. But today I'm going to cover a topic that we've all heard before, and that's insuring your collection. Again, there are videos out there that have done that and tried to talk about that. And guess what? Brick to the forehead. You all need, if you have a collection of any size whatsoever, you need to have a way to protect that collection. And there are different ways to do that. Some people get an extension or an addendum to their homeowner's insurance policy. There's pros and cons to doing that. But I think one of the best things to do is to get an independent insurance company that all they do is deal with collections. And that is the company that I found that I've used for years to do that is Collectibles Insurance Services. And so that sounds all great, but I wanted to ask a lot of the questions that probably a lot of you have if you're trying to decide how to do this and how to make it work for your collection. And so I've just brought in somebody from Collectibles Insurance Services, and his name's Jason, and he's going to join me here in a second. But first, let me just show you a quick video clip before I bring Jason on. And this is Jason's story in a quick nutshell. I'm sure he'll expand on it here in just a second.
I've been collecting beer cans ever since I was a kid. I started with 1 or 2 cans, and then it morphed into 6, 12, 24. Currently, my collection size is about 750. From time to time, you get opportunities where we have friends and families over to kind of reminisce when they remember some of these old breweries and some of the old cans. Back in 1992, a Cat 5 hurricane came ripping through. The east side of the house was demolished. It made me realize how important the collection was from the memories and the time spent. And then I came across Collectibles Insurance Services. You'll never be able to replace the collection, but having at least the peace of mind to be able to have something if something does happen was important.
So there he is. Let's talk about beer cans. Jason, how are you, man?
Hey, Mike. Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm great. First of all, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So obviously this is an issue that's hit you personally, and so it made you have to deal with all of this. What got you into working for Collectibles Insurance Services?
Yeah, I actually, ironically, my professional career, I've been in the insurance industry since I've only had one job. I actually played a professional sport when I came out of college. Transplanted on the East Coast, and figured I'm either going to tear my ACL or age out. So I needed to look at another profession, which I found the insurance industry, which I've been working over 25 years in it, and but been with working with Collectibles Insurance Services since 2016.
Okay, so 4 years now. What do you do for them?
I am their program manager. So essentially, I have a team that handles the sales side that we walk through with customers to answer questions about the program, how to get started, what happens after I take the policy out, talk about claims, and then we also do the underwriting team, which is also reports up to me. So we have both sides of that house.
Well, it sounds like you're the perfect guy that we should be talking to about how all this works, right? Because there's so many questions, I think, if you're trying to figure out if you want to do this. And even for a guy like me that's had it for years, maybe explain to everybody out there, what kind of things do y'all cover? What kind of collections do you cover? What losses do you cover? Let's do that first, and then we'll get into some other stuff.
Yeah, so let's start at the collection type. I would say that we probably our list is smaller on the things that we don't do than we actually do. So, for example, some of our top segments are, of course, sports, comic books, guns. We
Yes, yes,
then,
yes. I have all those.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Then we get into kind of more specific, like, my collection, which now gets into coins, beer cans. I can tell you some of the unique things that we've done. We've looked at a $500,000 frisbee collection to the largest pizza box collector in the country. We actually just quoted on a beautiful collection of Absolute bottles that were hand painted. So the vast majority of categories is pretty broad in what we do. I mean, I would say that the two main things that we don't do are collector vehicles and jewelry. Those are two main things that we sometimes get questions about, but primarily, the hobbyists is what we're really looking for.
Okay. And the types of losses that can be covered by a policy.
Yeah, so our coverage form is pretty broad. It's a blanket form. It's an all risk. So in our coverage form, we actually will list the things that we don't cover, and if it's not on that list, we will cover it. So, for example, if you think about all the major what they call perils or things that could happen, like on your homeowners, fire coverage, smoke, water, theft. Then we get into more unique coverage that our homeowner policy won't cover, that is near and dear to a collector's heart, like, for example, transit. We all go to shows, we all bring back items, and sometimes we see losses during transit that would not be covered. We will cover flood in some cases, depending upon where you're located. And we also have unique coverage as it relates to shipping, which you won't find in a homeowner policy. So, as you are a sports, you may be sending off some of your memorabilia for grading purposes, and so we do have that. We're trying to kind of cover those gaps that could be in some traditional insurance policies.
Okay, so you're bringing up some great stuff here. Because transit's, I think, a big thing, because a lot of collectors, especially in sports cards and coins and whatever,
Yeah,
comic books, you send off items to be graded to PSA or BGS or CGC or whoever. And those are, you buy insurance from the post office to cover that typically. Do y'all go beyond that? Does the policy cover a collector beyond that?
Yeah, and exactly. So we actually have some built-in coverage for that. So you would not have to purchase additional insurance. You may find that some of our collectors that will work, when you have the USPS, they may be limited depending on the values, because some of these values can get quite expensive. So you may have some limits on what they will cover. So we do have some expanded coverage that you can add on if we may have some things that maybe go into an exhibition for educational purposes that, that's during transit, that there could be some exposure there for the collector. So what we've done is essentially we've tailored an insurance program for the collector. It's probably fair to say, and I'm sure, some of your audience, would agree that, that they look at their homeowner policy as the way to cover some of these collectible items. But, there are some gaps, and that's what we're trying to do, is to bring some awareness that there may be some alternatives.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is when you have a homeowner's policy, even if you add these things, a collection, let's say, first of all, the documentation is unbearable, what you have to do. And there's typically a deductible, right? So
Right.
You have two of these things. And with y'all's policies, I know there are no deductibles. They're all no deductible policies. So if you lose $100, you get $100, right? You make a claim and it's a legitimate claim, you're going to get $100. And then, what else did I say just now?
The documentation is a great point.
The what?
The documentation is a great
Yes.
point.
So what does a collector need to do in order to document what they have in case they had a loss? And then how do they prove it if they have one? So let's talk about both those things.
Yeah, I would say, valuation and documentation probably are the two big things. And if I peel back, the program's been around for over 60 years, and it originated as a stamp collection program only. And so if you think in terms of stamps, so if somebody, a stamp collector, may have tens of thousands of stamps, and if they have to literally catalog and get an appraisal for each stamp, that becomes very labor intense.
Yeah, totally cumbersome. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we have done over time as we evolved in other segments is we've kind of reversed engineered it from the perspective of we only require in order to take a policy out, if you have an item or a set of items worth $25,000 or more, then we need to schedule that on your policy. Otherwise, there is no documentation that is required up front. But I will say my team works with collectors to make sure that before we do take out a policy, that you have it cataloged, whether that's on a spreadsheet, or if you have photographs of how it's stored, and maybe photograph of some of maybe your higher end items that could be backed up onto a jump drive or in the cloud. That way you would have access to it. We typically want to have that documentation because if you did file a claim, you would work with our company adjusters, and of course that's the moment that you would have to justify the fact that you had these items and how you determine the value at that point. Now, the value always becomes a question because we get collectors all the time saying, I'm not really sure how to value my item. I mean, I will say that we not only do we insure collectors, but we also insure dealers. A lot of online dealers that some of you guys would obviously know, they are also in the process to help valuation. And we've always believed that the collector will know the value of his collection better than anybody else because they've been collecting for years. They've been adding, they've been acquiring. They may not always have purchased, whether you buy it online and you have the purchase order, but they will have it documented typically on a spreadsheet what the market value is for that particular item.
So let's talk through the quick claims process, and then I have another topic. But all right, so let's say I had a loss and I lost my Mike Trout rookie card that's a PSA 10 for whatever. I lost it. Literally, I was on my way to work and it flew out of my car window or whatever. Some crazy random thing. I call up you guys and I say, hey guys, sorry, I lost my Mike Trout rookie. What happens at that point? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's probably no different than you would the process from a perspective of your homeowner or your auto claim. You would, obviously they would set up a case file. You'd have a representative that you would be working with, whether that's over the phone or through email, or in some cases that you'd have somebody on site that you'd be working with, working you through that process. And so it's really no different than that. They would review your policy. They would review the language in our policy, and then every situation is unique in itself. And then at that point, they would determine whether there's coverage or not, depending on the language of the policy. But if you take a look at our program, we do offer a lot of broad coverages. So in most cases, not all, that we then would settle the claim based upon the market value of that. So for example, I mean, you could buy an item for $500, 5 years ago, and it could be worth $10,000 today. So the nice thing about our program is that we don't have what's called co-insurance. And what that is, like some homeowners, you get penalized if you don't maintain the value at a certain level, like replacement cost. So without that co-insurance clause, and I may be getting a little technical, so I apologize.
That's okay.
Because our program is market value, because we have fluctuations both up and down, depending on the hobby, it allows that flexibility that you don't get penalized if because if you have a blanket of $50,000 insurance policy and you lose one item that you bought for 500, but now it's worth 10, you still have coverage up to that 10, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
And does that even cover, like, I got my Mike Trout card here, for example, and I walk away to go to the restroom or something, and my dog knocks over my coffee and spills coffee all over it and ruins it. Am I covered?
When you get into it's tricky because
what about accidents? I guess is what I'm asking about.
For me, I'm not a licensed adjuster. So specifically, I can talk in general terms. I know it would be a process, and you would talk specifically with one of our company representatives to determine. Obviously, they're going to look to find coverage for you in a circumstance. Accidents do happen, and they are covered. I will say that. In our policy, for example, I'll give you an example. There would not be coverage. That may be easier for me to answer and be a little bit more. So let's say you have a comic book and let's say you accidentally leave it on your back porch and forget about it. So we do have some exclusions in our policy for fading. So in other words, we're not going to cover a comic book that was left outside to the natural elements and now the cover has faded. Even though that may be accidental, but there is some language in our policy, just to be honest, that would not be covered. Mike, it depends. And again, we would rely on the licensed adjusters because, I'm a licensed insurance agent in all states, including DC, but we also have licensed adjusters who is a different license. They interpret the coverage form just like you would on your auto policy or your homeowner policy to determine coverage.
All right, last one real quick. I know the biggest probably fear that people have, or the reason collectors don't take out policies, is the biggest reason is they're concerned about the cost. Like, oh man, this is going to be too expensive.
Yeah.
Or I don't have enough to cover, why should I even bother? And it's all about transferring risk. I mean, that's what insurance is, right? It's transferring risk. And so maybe give an idea like per thousand or some idea of cost on a typical, it's because I think it's not that expensive relative to the value and peace of mind that I get.
Yeah.
Convince people that I'm right, that that's true.
Yeah. It's such a good question because, we found that, and it can vary in value. What is, there's a tipping point where somebody says, you know what, I need to get this insured. And it's ironic when we talk to a lot of the collectors because sometimes it's difficult to pull them over the line because, you're sitting in a room that you've got some collectibles. I'm here. I'm always looking at it. I'm reorganizing it. I'm touching it every day. Sometimes I feel like I probably spend more time with my hobby than sometimes my kids or my dog or my wife. So, nothing's going to happen to it because I'm always around it.
You're in a safe place. You're in a safe place to admit that here.
Okay. I'm all cards on the table. No. And like the video said, I mean, it took a catastrophic event that nothing actually happened to my collection. But living in South Florida and Miami, going through a Cat 5 hurricane, it made me realize, there's a lot of, there's some true value to it. And I wanted to sleep at night that, if something did happen, at least I'm covered. And so, really that's the educational piece that we try. So for example, I mean, I'll just give you my testimony. My beer cans, I've been collecting since I was 13. My value on my collection currently is probably somewhere in that $50,000 to $60,000 range. Now our pricing depends on, You state your value because, I'm in North Carolina. People in California versus Florida versus Texas versus the Northeast may have different types of elements. So all the rating structure is determined upon location as well. But my collection is I'm probably spending about maybe $350 a year for, if you think in terms of an automobile, right? If you have a $50,000 auto, I know it's on the road, but if you just look on the comp side, the physical damage side, I'm sure it's going to be more than $350,000 a year.
$150 a year.
Or $350. I'm sorry, my apologies, $350 a year. So, so in my mind, my mindset is, and some of the things that we have to work is, there's that affordability versus peace of mind that we have to try and get people comfortable with. And again, we're all voluntary. When you talk to my team, we're there to support, to help answer any questions to make sure people feel comfortable before they take our policy out.
Yeah. And one thing I love that y'all do is you allow for automatic increases as values, because in our world, the values have just gone nuts lately.
Yeah.
And so you can have it automatically kind of step up. Now your premium will go up incrementally, but you're having that coverage increase on its own. You can call in anytime and bump your coverage. If you've had an item appreciate tremendously, you can call in and it'll, in a mid-year or something adjustment. I've done that before. And so you pay whatever the difference is of the current value, and then it would just renew at that value on the next policy cycle. Yeah. So there's just, y'all are really easy to work with. And luckily, and thank the Lord, I've never had a claim to make. And I hope I never do. I hope, and that's what, you protect against the what if, and maybe, and hopefully not, just to make sure, because you want to have the money in case something happens. And none of us ever want that to happen. Right. But if it did, I sleep very well knowing that I have a place to call you guys and take care of that if I needed to. And so thank you for what you guys do. And I know you got to run. I've kept you a little longer than you had intended, but I really, really appreciate the insight. And hopefully you guys out there, maybe if Jason, you want to give one last kind of final thought to those collectors out there that are trying to decide whether or not to step over that line and get coverage. What do you think? What's one thing?
If anybody's considering it, come out to our website, collectinsure.com. In a matter of minutes, you can kind of get a sense of what the general rate is, just kind of a quick quote on what you, based upon your collection and your value, and have some conversation with my team. We if people are thinking about it, we're there to support. And if you do decide to take a policy out with us, wonderful. But we're also here for the collectors and to kind of help them navigate through this, these decision process as they're thinking about insurance. So that's probably the best thing they can do. Take a look at some of our information, and we'll be there to answer any questions.
That's great. And I'll put the link down to their website in the description below, so people can check it out. And again, if you have any questions, ask them here. I've been a policyholder for a long time. Ask me a question. But the experts are really Jason and his team. So I would encourage you, just like Jason said, to reach out to them, go to their website, use it. And I promise you'll be probably pretty satisfied with what you get out of that. So again, Jason, thank you so much for answering some questions about this topic, and really appreciate your expertise and what you're doing for the hobbyists out there.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Y'all have a great one. Thanks for watching, and keep collecting.